Welcome to Optimal, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dickon Weatherby. And this podcast and my website all focus on one thing, and that's the quest for optimal health. Our goal is to help your patients achieve optimal health so they can experience an optimal life. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google, and Spotify. And also make sure to go over to optimaldx.com and check out our resources on the site. Now, without any further delay, is today's episode. Well, hello and welcome everybody to Optimal, the podcast. My name is Dr. Dickon Weatherby, and I'm joined as always by Beth Ellen in Naples, Florida. How are things with you, Beth?
Hi, they're wonderful. Thank you.
So first podcast of 2024, and we have a very special guest today, Dr. William Harris, president and founder of the Fatty Acid Research Institute, and also the founder of OmegaQuant Analytics. Dr. Harris has been a leading researcher in the omega-3 fatty acid field for over 40 years, has published 300 scientific papers on fatty acids and health, the vast majority on omega-3. He has been on the faculty of 3 medical schools, the universities of Kansas, Missouri at Kansas City, and South Dakota, and has received 5 NIH grants to study omega-3. He was the co-author on 3 AHA statements on fatty acids and heart health, and as the co-inventor of the Omega-3 Index and other omega-3 blood tests, and the founder of OmegaQuant Analytics. Dr. Harris has been ranked among the top 2% of scientists worldwide based on the impact of his research. And we are very, very honored to have you today, Dr. Harris, to talk to us about omega-3 fatty acids, OmegaQuant, and any wonderful work that you're doing. So welcome to Optimal, the podcast.
Hey, thank you very much. It's fun to talk with you, Dick.
Excellent. So we see that the concept of omega-3 index started, I guess, in 2004. You published an article, and that grew into OmegaQuant Omega-3 index dried spot testing, which is conveniently available over the counter today, which is amazing. I'm just curious, what first piqued your interest in omega-3s and then developing the test that you developed?
It's a long story, but I'll start at the beginning. After I got my PhD in nutrition, general nutrition, I decided to focus on fats and cardiovascular health. And I went to your current state, Oregon Health Sciences University.
Up in Portland, yeah.
Yeah, right up there in Portland. 78. And I went to work for a researcher named Bill Connor, who was a physician scientist. And in those days, we were studying the effects of different kinds of dietary fats on blood cholesterol levels. And we, of course, knew that high intakes of animal fats, solid fats, butter, lard, tallow, etc., will raise cholesterol. And we knew that taking polyunsaturated fatty acids from basically seed oils, corn oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, whatever, lowered those, and those are liquid, they lowered cholesterol. But we didn't know if it was the animalness or the plantness or the solidness or the liquidness of these fats that was causing the rise or fall in cholesterol. So Bill had the idea of testing an animal fat that is liquid, like a plant oil, which was salmon oil. And so he assigned me as a new postdoc to organize and run a metabolic ward study, a full, complete feeding study with very high intakes of salmon oil instead of vegetable oil, instead of saturated fat, 3 different periods, tested people for a month each on these diets, fed them everything they ate. And that was my introduction. We gave them huge amounts of omega-3. In hindsight, it was like 20 to 25 grams a day in about 100 milliliters of salmon oil. So they were really socking it down, far more than anybody, even Eskimos, ever ate. But Bill thought, well, let's hit it hard and see what happens. And that's where we discovered that omega-3s lower triglyceride levels. Actually, they lowered cholesterol too, but the same way that plant oils did. So it turned out to be the liquidness, not the animalness or plantness of the oil. But it really wasn't an active lowering by the fish oil or the plant oil. It was actually the removal of saturated fat from the diet that lowered cholesterol. Saturated fat actively raises LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol. And you take it away and give anything else, even cardboard, I suppose, you would lower your cholesterol level. So that's what we found. And that was my introduction to omega-3. We studied bleeding as well, because there was concerns from Eskimo studies that have been reported in the 1970s that high doses of omega-3 might cause bleeding. So we studied platelet function as well as lipoprotein metabolism. That's the beginning. I stuck with that I studied really the effects of giving omega-3 on X, Y, and Z outcome in humans for about 20 years. And then kind of a light bulb went on in the early 2000s when I was at a meeting, American Heart Association meeting, and a report from the Physicians' Health Study at Harvard showed that people with the highest red blood cell, highest omega-3 blood levels were really low risk for having sudden cardiac death over time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that point that this kind of aha moment happened that says omega-3 levels in the blood are important. They mean something. They're modifiable, and they can have a big effect on heart health. And that's when I and my colleague, Clemens von Schacke, a cardiologist from Munich, we were together at this meeting, and we came up with this idea of let's create a test, a blood test that physicians can use, researchers can use, consumers can use. And so that was really the genesis. That was 2002 and until 2004 to write the kind of a position paper on that idea when we published that in April of 2004. So, golly, 20 years ago.
20 years ago. So out of that came the omega-3, what's known as the omega-3 index. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, 20 years down the road, where do you think that particular testing methodology, maybe even the research on omega-3s, where do you think that has the greatest impact on human physiology in terms of the testing and then also the therapeutic intervention?
We're just working on a paper right now that's where I'm interested in comparing the omega-3 index to other classic risk factors, particularly for heart disease, because that's where we know about this. So cholesterol, blood pressure, having diabetes, smoking, things like that, having a high HDL or low HDL. So there are 6 or 7 different factors that are part of risk calculators that are in common use around the world now. Used to be what's called the Framingham risk score. Now it's modified to more of a pooled cohort equation, it's called now. But these are equations that doctors can put certain numbers in that are your risk factors and predict your 10-year risk for having cardiovascular event. And our question was, does the omega-3 play in that sandbox? And so we have data from the Framingham study itself, and we have 10-year outcomes. We know we measured their blood levels around 15 years ago, omega-3 index in this cohort of people in Framingham, Massachusetts. And so 10 years has gone by, and we now know actually who developed heart disease and who didn't. And so we have these predictive equations. We can go back in time and say, well, would we have predicted that this person did? And we find that the omega-3 index actually adds predictive value to each and every one of those different, to cholesterol levels, to blood pressure levels, to smoking. And so it really is just as much a risk factor. I mean, if people think cholesterol is a risk factor, it's something that they ought to know about.
Yeah.
Then omega-3 is right in the same game. It's got the same power of prediction, if not better, than cholesterol levels. And so we're getting ready to publish a paper on that topic. But that's been my goal from the beginning, is to get this test to be seen by the medical community as important, if not more so, as a standard test that they run every day. Should be part of every annual physical. Partly because it's very easily modified. You don't need to take drugs to do it. You just increase your omega-3 intake. It's very simple. Eat more fish that contain high omega-3, or take fish oil supplements, krill oil supplements. They will raise the omega-3 index. And we know from other studies that is beneficial.
If I might say something, actually, I'm looking right now in our blog, because we have listed some of the research in the blog. In your 2017 article, found that if you increased your EPA and DHA intake by 1.5 grams a day, it could increase the index by up to 4%. So it's pretty easy, like you said, to do. And as a nutritionist, I'm a nutritionist by trade with my master's from Columbia. And one of the first things, I research and write more than anything now, but if I'm reviewing case studies or I'm talking to somebody or nurses, I work with nurses, I say, make sure they're asking if your folks are consuming seafood, preferably a high omega-3 seafood, at least 2 to 3 times a week. Because with that first question, you can figure out who's going to be at the highest risk of a low omega-3 index, right? Because even you can't convert the plant-based alpha-linolenic very well to EPA and DHA. Some people don't do it well at all. So that question, too, for physicians, that should be a screening question. And for nurses, a screening question, because if they're not consuming it at least 2 to 3 times a week. I'll bet you that their omega-3 is below 6 and probably below 4. I had someone with a 2%, which I think was probably the lowest I'd ever seen.
That's very low.
Yeah,
You're really getting to the bottom.
Yes, but
Was that a vegan?
intervention helps. No, he was not just junk food eater, didn't know much about nutrition. Yeah, but you can raise it, as you said. You get them on the right track with purified fish oil. I always tell folks, look for the purified version. And, it came up nicely. But all of the things that can be associated, not just sudden cardiac death, I think is one of the biggest things that you affiliated with or associated with, but also depression and inflammation and things that people walk through a physician's door every day. And if doctors and nurses and practitioners are not asking people about their omega-3 intake, they are completely missing that risk factor. And I find that terribly frustrating because cholesterol, it could go up and down for different reasons, but everybody knows their cholesterol level, but nobody even understands that they need to know their omega-3 index. So I push it like crazy.
Good.
Sorry to ramble.
Thank you.
So coming back to sort of the nutritional intervention, I mean, I think people can get somewhat hung up on ratios between EPA and DHA. And do you have a sense of a sort of a good targeted amount of omega-3s that will have a kind of a long-lasting effect on keeping that omega-3 index high?
Yeah, and that's a good question because people do ask. I mean, you're right. They kind of miss the forest for the trees.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I don't care a lot about the EPA DHA ratio in a given supplement or in a given fish. They come together naturally in fish.
Mm-hmm.
They're always together. The ratio is maybe, 40% one, 60% the other, or the vice versa. Something in the 50-50-ish area is just fine. I don't see a point in taking just DHA or just EPA. I think you're missing the boat in either case. So almost all supplements have both EPA and DHA in varying ratios, and I don't get exercised about. I'm more interested in the total amount of EPA plus DHA in the diet than I am the ratio.
Do you have a sort of recommended kind of milligram amount or doses that you've seen to have the greatest impact on moving the needle?
Yeah. Beth Ellen alluded to that a minute ago. We did publish a study looking at how much omega-3, EPA plus DHA together, regardless of the ratio, how much it took to raise the omega-3 index from A to B. And our standard is to go from the 4%, which is kind of the borderline low, to too low, to 8%, which is our target optimal level.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, based on this meta-analysis of different studies we did, we took about 1,500 roughly milligrams a day of EPA plus DHA to make that move. And that's not bad. That's not hard to do. That's a serving of salmon. It's probably 2 or 3 tins of sardines a week, that kind of thing. It's definitely within the realm of nutrition. You don't have to take supplements to do it.
Yeah.
It's just most people in practice find it's easier to take supplements than to eat fish.
I had a figure from, Stanton 2020. It said about only 20% of the world's population is thought to meet the minimum intake of 250 milligrams a day for EPA and DHA. And the lowest omega-3 index values below 4% were seen in North America, South America, Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia. So people aren't even meeting that minimum of 250 milligrams a day.
No.
Average. Yeah. So
and then there's, people will argue, well, okay, let's assume everybody did meet that. How many fish would you have to kill?
Yeah, I know.
Right? Do we have, then that gets on the ecological side, the sustainability issue. It's a complex issue, and that's kind of why I'm hoping as we talk more about the future that there will be basically an infinite source of omega-3 if we get them into plant-based ground plant with roots that can grow as much omega-3 as we need. It's going to kind of take getting over the GMO concern because it's a GMO product. But there are people trying to actually program plants that already make ALA and nudge them to make EPA and DHA.
DHA with the right enzymes, sure.
Wow.
That's what we're missing a lot of times.
Yeah.
So how far along is that research?
It's quite well developed. I mean, a lot of it's done in Australia. A lot of that work started there. And they've got some species of plants that will make, 20% of the fatty acids in their oil are EPA or DHA, which is fantastic.
I have to ask, are they crossing it with fish genes or human genes? Who has the genes to make that enzyme?
Fish. Of course, fish don't really make omega-3s either. The fish eat it like we do. It starts at the base of the food chain with the kind of single-cell microorganisms that make EPA and DHA from sunlight and sugar and, like plants do. So there's certain microalgae, particularly single-celled algae, not seaweed, but single-celled algae that have been discovered that naturally make EPA or DHA. And that's kind of at the base of the food chain. And of course, that's been exploited. There are algal omega-3 oils, which is great for vegans or vegetarians. And it's the same chemical. It's DHA and CPAs. It's just expensive to make it that way at this point.
I was going to ask that. Is it why not just grow more algae? I even had seen a long time ago, they grow algae in the smokestacks and the algae can consume the CO2 before it left the smokestack. And then they took the algae and used it for biodiesel. But you could take the algae maybe and use it for human consumption.
That is true. And whether it would be the actually eating the biomass per se, or eating the oils extracted from the biomass. That's what they're doing now when they produce an algal.
We have algae bloom. What about the algal blooms we have down here in Florida? I think you convert that to, right?
Depends on the species. They may not
right.
Let's talk to them.
Talk to them, yeah.
Because there's a product called, I think, Neuromins, which used to be the sort of plant-based DHA. I'm presuming that the kind of the research you talk about is along the same lines around algal sources.
I think it's Life. There's a thing from DSM called Life's DHA. Yeah, it began with DHA, and now they have species that make EPA as well, so they can blend the two together and make an EPA plus DHA product. And the original impetus for using algal products was to create a DHA that could be put into infant formulas, because there was concern that contaminants in fish, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
You don't want to get your omega-3s from fish, even though the fish oils don't have, they have in the past. They had some contaminants, but they're much cleaner now. But the FDA in those days didn't want to let fish oil be the source of omega-3 for infant formulas, but algae was fine.
Would you prefer algal or algal production versus the GMO production?
I don't care. I don't care where you get the molecules. It's just going to be a matter of people's mindsets about GMO. If you're just black and white on GMO, then okay, algal. If you're a little more what I would consider reasonable about, looking at case by case GMO situations, I don't really care. The one was the most economical, the one that's going to get the most omega-3 into the marketplace for the lowest price for the most people is what I'm in favor of.
How close are we, do you think, to having that GMO source of omega-3s?
I would guess within 5-10 years, but I think a lot of it just depends on
regulations.
Right. Exactly. I mean, there was a product called Soy Mega that was produced. It was a GMO modified soybean oil, or soybean makes ALA already. And Monsanto developed that GMO product, and it didn't produce EPA and DHA, but it produced a intermediate fatty acid called stearidonic acid, which is 18 carbons and 4 double bonds instead of 3. And that's the first step to go from ALA up to EPA biosynthetically. So getting to this stearidonic acid, 18.4, if you ate that stuff in oil, it was much more readily converted up to EPA and DHA than ALA was. So it was a step toward, and Soy Mega had this, it was a good product developed. It just died because of GMO opposition.
Would that conversion bypass delta-5 desaturase?
Yeah, but that's what they do. They put in the delta-5 and some delta-6 and some elongases, some enzymes that will elongate fatty acids. They graft them into plants and make sure that those genes are turned on by signals that are typically turned on other genes in plants.
Right.
Then you got to keep, anyway.
That's really the rate limiting step, isn't it? In the delta-5 desaturase in humans.
The first step, right.
The first step. But it's also somewhat rate limiting in terms of underactivity and how that enzyme can convert the ALA into EPA and DHA. Am I remembering my biochemistry correctly or making it too simplified?
I believe the first step is delta-6, but the delta-5 hops along very soon thereafter. And so, that's rate limiting. And it can be inhibited to some extent by how much omega-6 you eat, by linoleic acid, because they compete for the same enzyme. And I am a fan of a linoleic acid. I will admit it, come out of the closet, and I think omega-6.
We need both. It was the first essential fatty acid we recognized, right?
Right.
Is the linoleic.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to step into this, but I want to say one thing that some of the concern, I think, way back when with the GMO is how do you contain or control the contaminants? Like when they had that tryptophan scare and there was a contaminant in the tryptophan supplements. And when they followed it back, according to some physicians and researchers, they followed it back and found that the bacteria that was genetically engineered didn't just produce tryptophan, but produced a low, very, very low dose of a neurotoxin. And that was what caused the EMF and the problems with the tryptophan supplement. And that started the concern, I think, with the GMO, where you turn on one gene, are you turning on other genes? Do you know exactly what that gene is going to produce? So I know some of that early on, some of that concern was based on the contaminants. So how do you control?
That's real. I mean, it's quality control. It's, obviously a lot of testing beforehand in animals, careful testing in humans, and looking for those kind of off products. I mean, that's certainly an object lesson right there that I'm sure the industry is well aware of. I wasn't aware of it. Yeah. Thanks for telling me.
You're welcome.
So let's get back to the testing, because obviously that's an area that you've been heavily involved in creating the Omega-3 index. Sounds like from your upcoming research that you're really recommending that this test be sort of an entry-level test that people should get on an annual basis. And I highly recommend that as well. And the blog post that we've written also pointing to that. How often do you think people should be getting the test done? Obviously, annually would be the minimum. What is your recommendations if someone's come low? Let's say Beth's 2% person comes in very, very low. You put them on a therapeutic dose. How quickly would you see change? I mean, we're talking about in a week and a month. And then how often would you recommend that the test gets performed?
Bring in somebody low and get a baseline, which has already been done for this person. I would then calculate the dose and recommend that dose was probably 2,000 milligrams a day, roughly, for that person. And then you'll see changes in a week, but you won't see steady state in a week. It takes about 3 to 4 months to get a steady state.
With red blood cells.
In red blood cells.
In red blood cells, okay.
Now, partly because of their rate of turnover and partly because there's actually exchange from plasma fatty acids into red cells that come and go. But roughly 3 to 4 months is a good time to retest. And if that person is then up to 8% on that dose, I would say then annual. If they keep on that dose, if they stop the dose, then it's going to go back down. And then I think, again, I agree with annual will be great.
And I have to say, there's some people do not want to take fish oil. They won't touch fish. But there's actually a pretty good tasting, like mango peach fish oil. Some of the flavored fish oils are actually decent, and I've had kids take them.
Sure.
So if someone's afraid and says, I can take that amount, or I burp up the fish oil, get a good product and put it in the fridge, you might not burp it up. But anyhow, I just wanted to say that there are ways to get there if people are not interested in taking just cod liver oil even, or it's not controlled, but, pills or fish, then there are some flavored products that, a spoonful of, can help the medicine go down. So
yeah, right, exactly. And those emulsions are kind of almost toppings in a way.
They taste good.
They taste great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I ask about the being over the counter too. I mean, anybody can go and get your Omega Quant test. Am I right? Still?
Yeah.
Finger prick.
Anybody can order
the test.
At the at-home test, right?
Yeah, it's so simple. And yes, a baseline at least, because I think people will be surprised when they see that their level is 3 and then they read our blog and then they just feel compelled to have to bring it up to 8%.
Well, I'm sure your blog is compelling. That's good. Yeah, I mean, roughly 95% of Americans are below 8%.
At risk of sudden cardiac death. That fact rate alone.
I mean, it's not the only thing. I hate to pretend like omega-3s are a silver bullet and will cure every disease. They don't. But that's something you can do nutritionally that's fairly cheap and very safe, and it's effective. There's many other things you can do to reduce risk for all these diseases as well, but let's do everything we can.
Are there other critical nutrients that interplay with omega-3s to sort of help the body become more replete? I mean, I know we're focusing heavily on the fatty acid itself. What are your thoughts around sort of other nutrients that can help on the journey, so to speak?
Yeah. I mean, there's number one, not a lot of research on that. I'll say that. But there is some interesting evidence on B vitamins when we come to talk about dementia and cognitive function. There was one study where they looked at people given B vitamins and omega-3, and the people who were replete with omega-3, the B vitamins had a good effect on slowing cognitive loss, put it that way. If you weren't good at omega-3, then the B vitamins didn't. So it's an interesting interplay. It's probably a homocysteine-related issue that maybe the B vitamins lowered homocysteine, and that will help. It's just another risk factor, basically, in cognitive loss. But that's a common one. I mean, there's other factors that help you absorb omega-3s better, other food factors, primarily just fat. It's always important to take omega-3 supplements of a meal, and the meal that has some fat in it, so that your gallbladder will contract and you squirt out all the digestive juices, pancreatic juices that come out, and you'll better absorb the omega-3s that are there if you eat it with a meal, particularly if you're taking the ethyl ester form of omega-3s. They really do need to be taken with food. The triglyceride forms and phospholipid forms are not that critical, but it's always good, advisable to do that.
Curious around, you were talking about, well, let me just phrase my question there. Where do you see the field of omega-3 fatty acids bridging the gap between what I would consider sort of traditional dietary wisdom that may, naturopaths, chiropractors, functional medicine practitioners, I think we're all very aware of the role that omega-3 fatty acids play in health. I'm curious, as this testing methodology that you've created, is it being used in more allopathic or, modern medical facilities that you're aware of?
More and more. You're absolutely right. It's the functional medicine chiropractors, naturopaths who are far more attuned into this, and thank God for them. But so back in 2011, there was a laboratory, new clinical laboratory on a par, same idea as Quest or LabCorp, called Health Diagnostic Laboratory. And that was in Richmond, Virginia. And that lab, from the beginning, acquired the omega-3 index test and started offering it widely. And that was really the first time in standard clinical allopathic medicine, as they say, that doctors were seeing omega-3 levels reported out. And that was a great boost to the field, because that's what's kind of prompted people like the folks at Quest to bring on their own omega-3 test. It's not the omega-3 index, but it's an omega-3 status test. So, I'm halfway thankful for that. I wish it was the omega-3, but it's, I appreciate anybody shining a light on omega-3.
Right.
And then there's another lab up in Boston that's doing a kind of a whole blood omega-3 or a plasma omega-3, and different ways of doing it. But it's sneaking its way slowly into clinical medicine, but it's quite slow. Slower than I.
What can we do? What can we do to speed that up? We'll do anything.
Why don't you fund a consensus conference? There you go. But there are, I'm not sure you want to get this into the weeds, but
why not? Let's go for it.
Why not? Huh? Yeah. Omega-3s are fatty acids. Measuring fatty acid status is much more difficult than measuring cholesterol status or glucose status or measuring your blood sodium, for anything like that.
Yeah.
Because those are single molecules that you can measure as a concentration in the plasma, and the methods are standardized. Yeah. Everybody gets the same answer. Well, fatty acids, good Lord. They're present in plasma, they're present in red cells, they're present in platelets, white blood cells. There's a whole mix of them, and they're different proportions, different ratios in all those different tissues. And you can express it as concentration. You can express it as a percent of the total fatty acids, which is what we prefer. And you can express it in milligrams per deciliter or millimoles per liter, So there's so many different ways to express it. Coming to a consensus on exactly what tissue, what sample we're using, red cells, whole blood, plasma. How are we going to express it? And who standardizes the method across all these labs so we all sing the same song? Those are unusual obstacles in the fatty acid testing world. That's going to slow this down, I'm afraid. But we keep knocking on the door.
And the finger prick method is so simple, like I said, at the at-home test, being so simple for folks that don't want to have a blood draw. I would hope that would become the dominant go-to.
Well, yeah, outside the standard medical model. Exactly. If you want to monitor your nutritional status, I don't think of it as a diagnostic test. I think of it kind of as a screening test or a nutritional status test.
Right.
If you're taking charge of your own health, that's a perfect way to do it. If you're just depending on your doctor to watch all your values and keep you healthy, well, that's probably not going to happen.
Insurance might not pay either. And then you can get zapped with a big bill if you try to go through insurance and they say no.
Oh, yeah.
They charge you 4 or 5 times what you might have paid on the outside. So,
that's what our omega-3 index test is like $50, which is nothing, but it's
very reasonable.
It's pretty reasonable in context. That's true.
Yeah.
I agree.
What other tests does OmegaQuant have available?
Well, in the fatty acid world, and that's really, we are fatty acid specialists. We tried to play around in vitamin D and A1C and things that every other laboratory in the world measures. And I guess, what would you call it? Refocusing back to fatty acids and let our play in the sandbox we really know the best.
Right.
But we have mother's milk DHA test where a lactating woman can put a drop of her milk, just like on the same card as we would do a dried blood spot, put a dried milk spot, and we will measure the DHA content of her milk.
Wow.
And then she can, of course, American women, because they eat so little DHA, are low in breast milk DHA, which is important for the development of the brain of the baby. So that's monitorable as well. In the same context, we have basically a pregnancy test. It's a red blood cell DHA test, focuses just on DHA in mom's blood while she's pregnant. And that test aims for a DHA level of 5% or above. Now, that 5% for the pregnant woman is the level above which, well, actually, I should say the level below which there is an increased risk for preterm birth, which is, kind of a fascinating. People have studied omega-3 in growth and development, pregnancy and lactation for decades. And it's only been fairly recently that they finally realized that when they looked at the gestational age of babies on the omega-3 treatment, which are usually on the omega-3, or the mom was on the omega-3 treatment to help with cognitive development of the baby. But when they looked at gestational age, how long were you pregnant? There seemed to be 2 or 3 more days of carrying the baby when you're on high omega-3.
They might be mad about that, though.
Well, except it removes a lot of kids out of the preterm birth area.
Yeah.
True. I mean, if you're going to term, you don't necessarily want to go to term plus 10.
Right.
That's what I meant.
That's what you meant, right? But if you're going to be delivering at, 30 weeks and this pushes it back to 35 weeks, that's a huge benefit. And so there have been meta-analysis, Cochrane reviews that are showing, women that take omega-3 DHA during pregnancy have a significantly reduced risk of preterm delivery. And the blood level at which that becomes a problem is under 5% red cell DHA. So we have a test like that.
A specific test. Okay. Would the omega-3 index tell that same pregnant woman anything if she just did the omega-3 index?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, actually, it's pretty close to 8%. The equivalent of a red blood cell DHA for the omega-3 index is probably 7 to 8%. So you can get the same idea.
We have a lot of practitioners that are running sort of the full gamut of essential fatty acid testing.
Right.
And so I'm curious where sort of the omega-3 index as a test, is that enough?
That's a good question. And it's something I struggle with. OmegaQuant offers the basic test for $50, and I think it's $80 for what we call a plus test, which gives you some omega-6, omega-3 ratios and trans fat levels, which is kind of becoming passe in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't say that.
No, I think you're right.
And trans fats are going away. And then there's the complete test, is like $100, which is the full whole blood fatty acid profile. And I mean, there's some interesting information there. We know that, for example, palmitic acid is 16O saturated fat. Higher levels of that are predictive of increased risk for diabetes, for example. Metabolic syndrome. I'm becoming very interested in the blood linoleic acid level as a predictor of health outcomes. Omega-6, primary omega-6 fatty acid, linoleic acid. We've seen in many studies that the higher the blood omega-6 level is, linoleic acid primarily, the better your health outcomes, whether it's developing type 2 diabetes, whether it's heart disease, whether it's total mortality, higher omega-6. Linoleic is better.
Well, I can say, if I might, that linoleic doesn't always get converted to arachidonic acid, but I believe it was also converted into endocannabinoids. Talking about getting into the weeds.
Well,
So
right. I mean, that's
pathways.
There are different pathways, and that's a very good point because people, only less than 1% of the linoleic gets converted to arachidonic. Very little of it.
Very little.
We eat arachidonate, but only about like 100 milligrams a day compared to, say, 15,000 milligrams a day of linoleic acid. But you're right, Beth Ellen, that there are metabolic pathways that we're just discovering, or metabolites of linoleic that are not arachidonic acid. I mean, there's a thing called nitrated linoleic acid, where a nitro, NO group is attached to linoleic acid. And that's one of the major, when you measure blood nitric oxide, part of it, what you're measuring is what's attached to linoleic acid.
So it might have some biological function.
It is biological function. And all the, what we call oxylipins, part of which are the endocannabinoids, are all in there doing stuff. It's all black in there right now. We can't see. We're just discovering some of these molecules. And it's very possible that a high linoleic acid, independent of any conversion to arachidonate, has health benefits.
Mhm.
And we just need to, there is such a negative view of linoleic acid. Maybe it's a negative view of seed oils, but it flows over into a painting of linoleic acid as a poison. That's kind of a fight I'm fighting all the time, that I just don't think. I mean, somehow people don't think you can like omega-3s and omega-6s. You have to hate the omega-6s if you like omega-3.
We need the balance. We need balance in the middle, like with everything.
Exactly. You need to find out what the right level is of each and aim for it.
I was always frustrated. I was in nutrition support mostly in my clinical life and the ICU and in trauma. And I'd waited decades for them to come up with a structured lipid that had some omega-3 in it, because with parental nutrition, all they give is omega-6. And with that imbalance, how are you going to control inflammation? And when I left the field in about 2008, as far as nutrition support, they still hadn't come up with that structured lipid with omega-3. So yeah, the balance always.
Omega then wasn't available then?
Gosh, not in 2008 was last time I stepped inside the ICU.
That could be. I think it's been approved now, but it's a product that's got roughly 10% EPA and DHA.
Right, the intravenous product for parental nutrition. That's wonderful to hear, because I'd wait since 1990 and wait.
Yeah, right. But that's, they finally figured that out.
So does your complete test, does that measure the linoleic acid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it reports out 24 fatty acids or so and some ratios. And, honestly, I think there's some information in there like palmitate and linoleic. A lot of our customers like to have the total fatty acid profile. I have trouble knowing kind of what to do with it. And most of the fatty acids, many fatty acids are present in like less than 5% of the total. Less than 1% of the total, but they're part of the list. And many of them are not dietary fatty acids. You don't eat them. They're made in the body from the fatty acids you do eat. And so how to change them, do you want to raise them or not? Is there evidence that raising them, how would you do it? And is there any evidence that if you did know how to raise it, would you be able to reduce risk for some disease? We don't know. It's great to collect this data and to be able to look at those questions. But at this point, I think a lot of folks just like to get a lot of numbers.
That's been my experience. The amount of, I've been doing this for 25 years, and the amount of the biomarkers that people are running nowadays, it's just off the charts. I'm looking at these panels going, I don't even know how you would even make an assessment on any of this stuff.
TMI, too much.
Yeah, TMI. It's like, anyway.
Right.
An interesting question. Obviously, we got a lot of new practitioners coming into the field what would you say for a new practitioner coming into the field of functional integrated medicine? What advice would you offer for incorporating omega-3 assessments and interventions into their practice?
It's pretty obvious. I would highly recommend getting an omega-3 index, and just that one number. That's very actionable. Yeah. That number has been tied to a lot of clinical research. So we know that if you achieve this target level, you're going to actually see a clinical benefit. You can't feel a high omega-3 or low omega-3. It's like cholesterol. You just can't feel it. So you have to depend on a lab test to tell you you're in a healthy spot or not. And that should motivate you. Numbers motivate us nowadays. We've got so many biometrics. How many steps have you taken today, right?
Yeah, right.
So I would recommend that anybody start at least with the basic omega-3 test as part of a screening panel for everybody. And then as you try to optimize their health, that's one of the components you address. And maybe there's 7 other things you got to do based on your exams. But this is one that's well documented and easy to modify.
I love it.
Perhaps you could just share with our listeners where people can get hold of the omega-3 index testing. Is it, like you said, through OmegaQuant?
OmegaQuant.com. Really, that's the only place you can get the omega-3 index, or at least our version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, OmegaQuant, OMEGA, then quant, like quantity.com. Then you can just order the test online. It comes in a little kit. You prick your finger, put a drop of blood on a piece of paper, mail it in. And I think our turnaround time is like 4 or 5 days from receipt in the laboratory. You should get a report with some instructions. And we have a omega-3 index calculator on the website. And you take your number and stick it in the calculator, and it will tell you about, you want to increase to 8%, how many milligrams of EPA and DHA
that's fantastic.
we're taking.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That I think is helpful. So that'd be my advice. Pretty simple.
There you go.
Do they have to avoid supplements before taking that test? Are there any restrictions?
Well, you mean like on the day of?
Well, a week before, sometimes there are some restrictions on certain tests.
Yeah, what we see a lot is you give people a test and they say, oh, wait a minute, I know I'm no good. I know I'm too low.
Oh.
Let me take the supplements for a while, then I'll test. And then they put it on the shelf and they never take the test.
Yeah.
The point is you want to know where you are at baseline. I mean, maybe that's just us being scientific, right? But that's what I like to know. And then you can see how much impact the change you make has made. If you wait until you've taken X amount of fish oil pills, it's not going to affect, if you eat a meal of salmon the night before, for example.
Yeah.
That's not going to affect the omega. It'll affect your plasma levels, but it won't affect your red cell levels. And that way that the omega-3 index is a lot like a hemoglobin A1C.
Right.
Compared to a plasma glucose level. It doesn't move around a lot.
Excellent. Well, we're drawing to a close here, and I just wanted to, we always ask our guests if there's anything that you're personally doing other than taking omega-3 fatty acids. Is there anything personally that you do, your daily routine, supplements that you take, specific protocols, anything that you do?
One thing about getting a degree in nutrition, I mean, looking back on it, and you guys can appreciate it, I think. You get real excited when you're reading a lot of these popular nutrition books. And you get the feeling that omega-3, mega vitamins, mega anything is going to cure everything. And you get excited about it. You say, I'm going to go to school for this. And I did. Now I got my PhD in nutrition. And I became very cynical about some of the experiments when I went back and looked at the books that motivated me. I said, well, that was done in a rat. Come on. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And the dose was outrageous. You can't even eat that much in a human. So, and you start getting a little jaded. All that to say, I take a multivitamin and take omega-3. That's all I take.
Do you eat fish too? Do you also eat?
Oh, yeah. I try to eat salmon primarily twice a week if I can. But I'm taking about 1,400 milligrams EPA, DHA a day.
Will we come to that point in the presentation? Any shameless plugs that you want to make for anything that you're doing? How would people find you? Are you speaking at any engagements? Are you?
No, I'm not. Haven't got a TED Talk yet.
You should.
Maybe I should. My daughter has one, at least a local TED Talk. She talked.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, Christina's she got her PhD in nutrition from Penn State, and she works with us, and she's real interested in the pregnancy, early life, because she's got little kids. So she did a really nice TED Talk on the insanity of avoiding fish while you're pregnant because you're afraid of mercury.
Right.
And all the good things you throw out with the baby in the bathwater by avoiding fish. So it's a good little talk. Anyway, I have not got a TED Talk. And I don't have a Twitter or an X, and I don't do Facebook. And
you sound like me. I don't do any of that stuff. I love it.
Good man.
I don't like that.
Fist bump.
I do have a Twitter account just to follow hockey, but that's about it. I don't do anything else.
That's what it's good for.
That's what it's good for. I mean, we have a Fatty Acid Research Institute is a group that I formed a couple of years ago, and we have a website. It's just look up Fatty Acid Research Institute, find it. And there's my bibliography is there, and my papers are there. But, the people at Omega Quant want me to be more socially active, as they say. And I'll do what I can. But there's a tremendous amount of videotapes, interviews. We do a thing at Omega Quant on roughly a monthly basis called Omega Matters, where we interview omega-3 experts on different topics.
Fascinating. So
we put that up on the website at Omega Quant. So a lot of information there, a lot of YouTube. Me talking about this, that, or the other, or Christina, so there's a tremendous amount of information at the Omega Quant website.
Excellent. So that would be the place to go.
That's the place to go.
Well, Dr. Harris, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to share this information with us. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. It sounds like this new research article that you're working on, when would that be coming out, do you think?
Well, we haven't submitted it yet. So it'll probably be out sometime in 2024, but we're just Google my name.
Yeah.
Go to PubMed and put in Harris W.S. William Stephen, and you get publications that are the new ones that are available online. I should mention one, just got a second, where you just had one paper published, fascinating paper. It was from a study done at Harvard in patients who had survived a heart attack, and they were randomized to fish oil, 4 grams of Lovesa, so the prescription omega-3. 4 grams of Lovesa or placebo within a couple of weeks after their heart attack. And then they were given the omega-3s for 6 months. That's all, 6 months. And then at the end of that time, the investigators did cardiac MRI to look at the details of how the heart was healing after the heart attack. And they found that, giving the omega-3, there was certain beneficial remodeling factors in the heart. And this was published 5 or 6 years ago. We just had a new paper that came out looking at what happened to these people after 6 years. And the investigators went back and looked at who developed what they call a major adverse cardiac event in the 6 years following the study. And remember, they only taken Omega-3 for 6 months. And the idea was, well, maybe there was something, maybe they got set on a good path in that 6 months. And it turned out when they did the analysis by who was assigned to placebo and who was assigned to fish oil, there really was no difference over the next 6 years of who had these major adverse cardiac events. But if they looked at it a different way, they asked the question, well, who increased their omega-3 index by 5% or more? Regardless of whether you were assigned omega-3 or not, the question was, did your omega-3 index go up over 5% or not? And when they looked at it that way, the people who had that good response to the omega-3 index to supplementation had 50% less myocardial and heart events over the next 6 years than the placebo group, even just being exposed for that 6 months.
Fascinating.
How do we know they didn't keep up, though, with the omega-3s after the test? They might have said, this is important, I'm going to take supplements.
They may have, but that should have been the case also in the placebo group, because the placebo group knew the outcome at the end. So if I'm in the placebo group and I find out, I was in the placebo group, rats. But those guys over there, they were taking fish oil, so I'm going to take fish oil. So that should be evenly distributed.
So the 6-month period following the MI was that important period, maybe, to get that fish oil and EPA, DHA.
It was. And I wish they had started on the day of the heart attack.
Right.
They started 2 to 4 months, 2 to 4 weeks later, which is really sad. But even with that, they still found this long-term effect based on the change in the blood omega-3 level that was not there. And part of the problem with, some people, when you get, just because you get assigned to an omega-3 group doesn't mean you're going to take it. It doesn't mean you're going to absorb it.
Right.
Plus, in these studies, kind of like you alluded to, you could be in the placebo group and you're reading the newspaper. And you're thinking, I don't know what I'm taking, but I'm not taking any chances. I'm going to go get some fish oil and take it. Just don't tell anybody. That's what I might do.
The Levasa was the ethyl ester form. Were they told to take that? Just out of curiosity. Is that the form they would have to consume fat at the meal with?
Right. They have to take that with a meal. Right.
I hope they tell them that, because some people are told to cut fat to such a point that it's unhealthy. I just hope that they
do that. And some people take their medicines first thing in the morning on an empty stomach, and that's not good for Levasa. So that's part of the reason probably that the omega-3 level didn't go up in some people in the omega-3 group. But that just raises the point, the important thing is what's your tissue level? What's your blood level? Not so much how much you're taking.
Right. And I had seen that the research said the red blood cell level did reflect the tissue level in the GI tract and in the heart.
Yeah. That,
it's still a pretty good reflection.
Yes, it is. And that's a different question. Does the blood reflect the tissues? It's different than does the blood reflect your group assignment in a study. Anyway, I got off on that. That was just a
fascinating.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Harris. Really appreciate you joining us today. For anyone that's interested, go to OmegaQuant.com, Omega, OmegaQuant.com. Get yourself tested. Very, very important. We also have a lot of articles over at optimaldx.com and our blogs. Beth Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today, and wish all of you very well. I'm Dr. Weatherby from Optimal DX. Take care and stay optimal.